It was shining so brightly it hurt to behold it, but I could see enough to realize it was wearing the body of one of the SN's astropaths. Plug sockets still decorated its gleaming flesh, some still trailing wires. All clothing had burned away, but the astropath's extensive bionic augmentation was clear. The body had no legs, just a dangling assembly of cables and machined connectors where the astropath, like most of Maxilla's crew, had plugged directly and permanently into a volt socket. Haldane and two of the guards ran towards it, the guards shouting prayers against the warp as they opened fire. Haldane drew a force sword from his waist. I felt the backwash as he assaulted the demon host with the full force of his psychic powers. Ozma was staring at the demon host in astonishment. It suddenly occurred to me that despite his rank and authority, he probably had very little first-hand experience of abominations like Cherubael. "You wanted the demon host, Grandmaster," I said. "Looks like you've got him." My words snapped him into activity, and he looked round, but Barbarisata was already hissing through the air directly into my extended hand. "Heretic!" he screamed. His power hammer swung up in his plated fists, crackling with energy, and he came at me. He had significant advantage. He was psi-shielded and heavily armored against an adversary with no armor whatsoever. Our weapons crashed together. We broke and swung again. There was massive strength behind his blows, and I was still weak from the psychic mauling Haldane had given me. "There's no time for this, you fool!" I yelled. "I didn't unleash the demon host, but I'm the only chance you have to stop it." Behind us, Cherubael giggled hysterically as it torched the guards firing at it. It skimmed down and locked in combat with the furious Haldane. Ozma was defiant. He would not break off. He deflected my sword stroke with a hammer blow so powerful I was rocked back, my guard open. His follow-through came right at my face, and I threw my body back to evade it. It missed. Barely. The hammer's energy scorched my cheek. But I had lost my footing. I crashed over onto the marble deck and rolled sideways as the hammer came down and cracked the stone flags. Ozma's weapon, the Malleus symbol of his Ordo, rushed up again for the death stroke. There was a shriek of energy, and the air above me was split by a blinding turquoise beam. It struck Ozma full in the face and vaporized his head in a splash of light, bone shards, and adipose tissue. His body hit the floor with a metallic crash, and the fused remains of his heavy augmetic jaw bounced away across the deck. I rose. Maxilla, still sprawled and wretchedly twisted where Haldane had dropped him, slowly lowered his hand. The digital ring weapon on his elegantly gloved finger was glowing. I turned back to the fight. Medea and Alina had entered the room along with the remaining guards, looking on in horror. Some of the guards fled. Haldane was being driven back across the bridge by the radiant, cackling demon host. He was throwing everything he had at Cherubael, and the demon was just laughing, teeth backlit into silhouette by the light of the warp streaming out of its gaping maw. Haldane's robes were beginning to smoulder. "Alina!" I shouted, and she ran to me. None of the awestruck guards even tried to stop her. "There's no time to do this cleanly. I need you next to me. You may be able to block some of its power." She nodded and grabbed my coat with both hands. She was terrified out of her wits, but she did not falter. I pulled the Malus Codicium from my coat and leafed desperately through the pages. I couldn't find what I was looking for. I damn well couldn't find what I was looking for. The marble deck of the bridge cracked and parted underneath Haldane, like solid ground split by an earth tremor. One of his feet slipped into the crack, and he swayed. Cherubael snorted with glee and clapped its hands. The deck quaked, and the crack closed again, like a vice. Haldane screamed. He screamed the terrible howl of the damned. He was pinned into the deck by his crushed leg. Cherubael advanced. Haldane slashed with his sword in terror. The blade melted. The Inquisitor's clothes caught fire. Ablaze from head to foot with green flames, he screamed again. On fire, upright, fixed to the spot, he looked just like a heretic burning at the stake. Cherubael looked away from his prey, bored with it now it was dying. It surged forward and floated towards me. Alina let out a sobbing whimper. "Stay close," I told her. "Hello, Gregor," said Cherubael. Its voice was hoarse and impaired. The astropath it inhabited hadn't spoken for many years, and the voice organs had partially atrophied. "Don't we have fun together, Gregor?" It went on, its blank eyes fixed on me. It was smiling, but there was nothing warm in those vacant orbs. Nothing at all, in fact, except evil. "It's always such a delight to play these games with you.
But this game must be a bit of a surprise, eh? Didn't expect to see me, did you? It wasn't you that called me this time.
It came closer. I could feel, not heat, but burning cold emanating from it. I was still ripping through the pages of the book to find what I was looking for.
Here's another surprise for you,
it added, dropping its voice to a whisper.
This is the last time we play. I've had enough of the way you make up all the games. You see what I did to that horse-faced idiot? I won't do that to you, old friend. I'll do something that really, really hurts.
It lunged forward, but then backed off slightly, as if stung. It had touched the psychic dead zone around Elena. Cherubale turned his attention down towards her.
Hello. Aren't you a sweet little thing? What a pretty face. Shame I'm going to ruin it.
Elena sobbed.
You're a clever old stick, Gregor. Always careful enough to have an untouchable at your side when you meet with me. This isn't the regular one, though, is it? What happened to her?
I wrenched the book open.
She won't save you, mind,
said Cherubale, reaching out with hands that were sprouting thick, ugly talons. I thrust the book up and held it in front of his eyes with both hands, clamping the pages open so that the demon host could clearly see. It was diagrams of the 4 chief runes of banishment. They wouldn't banish Cherubale because they hadn't been properly invoked, but I was pretty sure just reading them would hurt. Cherubale squealed and tumbled back. I stepped forward a pace, keeping the book raised and open. Racked with agony, the demon host soared back across the bridge, crashed through the main screen, and shattered the hololithic plates in a shower of crystal and sparks. It bounced twice off the ceiling like a maddened hornet, fighting a window pane, the colour of its flame halo turning yellow and then furnace orange. Cherubale dropped, hit the floor, and burned through it, leaving a circular, smouldering hole. "Oh, dear Emperor," Elena gasped. "Come on," I said. "It won't be long before it comes back for another try. Move!" Medea ran forward. The last few guards were busy beating out the flames swathing Haldane with their capes. He was still screaming. "Get her out of here," I told Medea, pushing Elena towards her. "Hangar deck, go!" They hurried towards the exit. Deep bass detonations from somewhere, deep in the SN, rocked the floor. Multiple alarms were sounding. Sparks cascaded from the buckled ceiling of the bridge. I went over to Maxilla. His eyes flickered, and he looked up at me. "I didn't mean it," he said in a tiny voice. "Mean what?" "I told that brute none of you meant anything to me. But I didn't mean it." "I know." "Thank you," he said, and died. I ran from the bridge into one of the main longitudinal corridors. Smoke was boiling along it from untold damage below. On the floor I saw weapons and cloaks dropped by Ozma's guards in their panic to leave. I'd taken about a dozen steps when a loud voice told me to halt. Fischig was coming after me, aiming his bolt pistol with a straight, firm arm. He was bloodied and bruised by the explosion that had knocked him down, but there was an utterly determined set to his face. I'd seen that look before, but I'd never been on the receiving end of it. "Stop where you are," he said. "Come on, we have to get clear. The ship is dying." "Stop where you are," he repeated. "Come with me. I'll explain everything, and you'll see why it's vital for us to—" "Shut up," he said. "It's all lies. It's always been lies. You know you nearly fooled me back then. I was almost convinced I'd made a terrible mistake going to Ozma, but then you showed your true colours. Brought that demon back and proved that everything I feared about you was true. This isn't the time or place, Godwin. I'm leaving now. Come with me if you want." I turned my back on him and walked away. "Gregor, please!" I kept walking. I was sure he wouldn't shoot. We went back too far. When it came down to it, he wouldn't be able to stop me. The bolt gun roared. The shot exploded my left knee. I cried out and fell, leaning on Barbarisata. There was blood everywhere. I couldn't believe he'd found the will to do it. With a yelp of pain, I hauled myself up on the sword. He fired again, and now my right leg went out from under me, also mangled at the knee. I lay on my back. I could feel the death throes of the SN quaking and thundering through the deck beneath me. Fischig stood over me. "Stop this," I gasped. "Get me to the hangar!" He drew back the slide of the bolt pistol. He was shaking with distress, racked by grief and disappointment and duty and belief. "Please," he said, "renounce it all. Repent your sins and accept the Emperor for the good of your soul. It's not too late." "You're still trying to save me," I managed to get the words out through the pain. "Glory be, Fishig. You actually shot me so you could try and save my soul." "Renounce the warp," he stammered. "Please, I can save you. You're my friend, and I can still save you from yourself." "I don't need saving," I said. He aimed the gun at my head. His finger tightened on the trigger. "May the Emperor protect you, Gregor Eisenhorn," he said. He twitched. Once. Twice. He swayed. The bolt pistol wandered in his lolling hand and fired, harmlessly, against the corridor wall. He dropped to his knees and then fell forward onto his face, as if he was praying. I struggled to pull myself up so I could lean my back against the wall. My legs were crippled, bloody and useless. Medea crouched down next to me. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. She let go of the needle pistol and let it clatter onto the deck. Kara appeared behind us, a las carbine in her hands, with Elena and Amos at her heels. They all looked in horror at the sight of me and Fishig. Amos was deathly pale, and leaning on my rune staff like a penitent pilgrim. "Help me up," I said, from between clenched teeth. Kara and Medea hoisted me up between them. I looked at Amos. "You summoned Cherubale. It was you, wasn't it? You summoned him into one of the Essen's poor bloody astropaths." "They were going to burn us as heretics," he said softly. "And then we'd never be able to stop Glor." "But how did you perform the rituals, Uber? You didn't even have the book anymore." "That book," he sighed. "That damn book. It's all in here now." He tapped his wrinkled forehead with a scrawny finger. He'd memorized it. During those weeks of study, he'd memorized the Malus Codicium. Thanks to a meme virus, he was a data addict. That's what made him such a fine savant. And now his addiction had taken him to overdose. "You memorized the whole thing?" "Word," he swallowed, and then finished. "Perfect." There was another juddering boom, and a rush of hot air gusted down the corridor. "Are we going to stand around like ninkers all day, or are we going to get off this ship?" Kara snapped, bracing against me. "I think that might be wise," I agreed. But the way was blocked. Cherubale had come back for me. Its malicious rampage had crippled the SN. It was still seething with the pain I had inflicted. It wasn't even talking anymore. It surged down the corridor towards us. I couldn't reach the Malus Codicium now. I was having enough trouble just standing up. Elena cried out in terror. I cursed, helpless, useless. Amos hobbled forward and placed himself between us and the charging warp spawn. He braced the rune staff against the floor and lowered the tip towards Cherubale. He knew what to do. May the God Emperor show him mercy. He knew better than I. There was a release of power and light so powerful that it was beyond sound. The host body disintegrated, showering us with a hail of burned flesh, charred bone, and blackened augmetic debris. Amos and the rune staff shuddered and jerked as they both lit up with corpuscent that crackled and flashed up and down them. The last few electrical arcs sizzled away into the deck. Amos remained standing where he was, with the staff still upraised. A tiny plume of smoke licked off the headpiece. "Amos! Amos!" "I've dispossessed it. For a moment," Amos said without turning round. His voice was low, and his words were emerging only by huge effort. "So it's weak and confused. But that won't last. We need a proper host vessel for it to occupy." He turned to face us. The destruction of the astropath's host body had singed his clothes and knocked his eyeglasses off. "What did you do with it?" I asked. He didn't answer. The effort would have been too great. Amos would only ever say 2 more words to me. "Amos, what did you do with it?" I repeated. He opened his eyes. They were blank. Completely blank. It took us 10 minutes to make the demon host safe. 10 minutes we really didn't have. I was encumbered by the fact I couldn't move unaided. Elena had to hold the malus codicium for me as I did the work, making the marks and runes and wardings with blood from my own wounds. I recalled the same hasty rituals I had performed on the beach at Mikwal. "Come on," Kara urged. "There. It's done. Amos, can you hear me? It's done." His old hands were shaking. He lowered the staff. I could see his mouth trying to form the words, but he couldn't manage it. But I knew this part. The incantation, the litany, the abjuration against evil. The final sealing words. "In servitutem abduco, I bind thee fast forever into this host." Medea nearly burned out the lift jets of Maxilla's bulk pinnace, getting us clear of the hangar deck. Everything shook. It didn't have anything like the kick of the old gun cutter, but she nursed every last ounce of thrust she could out of it. We managed to get about 16 kilometers from the SN when the first of the real spasms shook it. The majestic sprint trader, Isolde pattern, pride of its master, looked like a black shell to us, lit from within by raging atomic fires, spilling trails of debris behind it as it slowly tumbled into the embrace of the gas giant. There was a small, bright flash, and then 2 more, almost simultaneous, like a flicker. Then a white dot appeared where the SN had been, and grew bigger, and then became a white line that got brighter and longer and closer, until we could see it was the flaming edge of a huge expanding disk of nuclear energy. The pinnace vibrated frantically like a bead rattle in the hand of an excited child as the shockwave seared past and around us. Then it was quiet and still again. And the SN was gone. Amos was crumpled in one of the high-backed acceleration seats in the pinnace's passenger space. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was shallow and ragged. Kara helped me to the seat next to him. She was saying something urgent about improving the tourniquets and field dressings on my legs, but I didn't really hear her. Uber. As if I had disturbed him in his sleep, he opened his eyes. They were his eyes again. Bloodshot, old, blinking to focus without his eyeglasses. His breath sounds were getting worse. "You hold on," I said. "There's a portable Medicare unit in the cargo section. Elena's trying to get it working." He grunted something and swallowed. "What?" I said. He surprised me by suddenly taking my blood-stained hand and gripping it tightly. He turned his head slowly and squinted at the demon host we had made together. It sat, strapped into its seat, on the other side of the aisle, head bowed and dormant.
"Most," he whispered, "most perturbatory."
I was going to reply, but his grip had slackened. His breathing had stopped. My oldest friend had gone. I sat back, gazing at the cabin roof. The sensations that I had been blocking swept in and overwhelmed me. I felt frail, as if I was made of paper. I knew I had lost a huge quantity of blood. The pain in my legs was like fire, but it was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. I heard Kara calling my name. She called it again. I heard Elena asking me to say something. But the void had come up like a wall, and they were too far away to hear. Chapter 19. In the halls of Israel, leaves of darkness, in the name of the holy God Emperor. Someone, somewhere close by, was using one of those damned shuriken catapults. I could hear the jut-jut-jut of the launcher mechanism and the thin, brittle sounds of the impacts. There was blood in my mouth, I noticed. I'd worry about it later. Crezia would fuss, no doubt. "You should not be doing this," she had warned me, fiercely, in the infirmary of the Hinterlight. Well, that's where she was wrong. This was the Emperor's work. This was my work.
"Moving up,"
Nail said over the intervox.
20 paces.
"Understood," I replied. I stepped forward. It was still an effort, and still very much a surprise to feel my body so wretchedly slow. The crude augmetic braces around my legs and torso weighed me down and forced me to plod, like an ogre from the old myths. Or like a battle titan, I considered, ruefully. One heavy footstep after the next, lumbering to my destiny. It was the best work Cressier and Antribus had been able to manage, given the time and the resources available. Cressier had passionately wanted me confined to vital support until I could be delivered to a top-level Imperial facility. I'd insisted on being mobile. "If we throw together repairs now," she had said, "it'll be worse in the long term. To get you walking, we'll have to do things that no amount of later work can repair, no matter how excellent." "Just do it," I'd said. For the opportunity to reach Pontius Glor, I'd happily sacrifice prosthetic sophistication. All I needed was function. Barbarisata trembled in my right fist as it sensed a bio-aura, but I relaxed. It was Kara Swole. She jogged back down the chasm towards me, dressed in a tight green-armoured body-glove and a thick quilted flak coat. She had a dust visor on, and a fat-nosed compact hand cannon slung over her shoulder. "All right, boss?" she said. "I'm doing fine." "You look—" "What?" "Pissed off." "Thank you, Kara. I'm probably annoyed because you and Nail are having all the fun taking point." "Well, Nail thinks we should tighten up anyway." I voxed back to the second element of our force. In less than 2 minutes, Elena and Medea had joined us. Alongside them came Leif Gustine and Call Crane, 2 men from Gideon's band who had subbed as reinforcements, as well as Gideon's mercenary archaeologist, Kenza. "Moving up," I told them. "You managing okay, sir?" Elena asked. "I'm fine. Fine. I just wish you'd—" I stopped. "I'm fine, thank you, Elena." They were all still worried about me. It had only been 3.5 weeks since the carnage at Giganda. I'd only been walking for 5 days. They all quietly agreed with Cressier's advice that I should still be in the infirmary and leaving this to Ravener. Well, that was the perk of being the boss. I made the damn decisions. But I shouldn't be angry with them for worrying. But for Kara and Elena's frantic emergency work on the pinnace, I'd be dead. I'd crashed twice. Elena, the only one whose blood type matched mine, had even made last-minute donations. Pulled apart at the seams, my band was pulling together tighter than ever. "Let's pick up the pace," I said. "We don't want Nail and Ravener to have all the glory." "After you, Iron Hoof," Medea said. Kara sniggered, but pretended she was having trouble with her filter mask. "I can't imagine why you think you can get away with that nickname," I said. We heard the shuriken catapult buzzing again. It was close, the sound rolling back to us around the maze of the gorge.
"Someone's having a party," said Gustine.
Bearded, probably to help disguise the terrible scarring that seemed to cover his entire skin. Gustine was an ex-guardsman turned ex-pit fighter turned ex-bounty hunter turned Inquisition soldier. He said he came from Raz Bysor in the Segmentum Tempestus, but I didn't know where that was. Apart from that, it was in the Segmentum Tempestus. Gustine wore heavyweight grey ablative armor and carried an old, much-repaired standard Imperial Guard las rifle. He'd been with Ravener for a good many years, so I trusted him. The whizzing sounds echoed again, overlapping with laser discharges. "Ravener's friends," Medea said. None of us were comfortable about the Eldar. 6 of them had arrived on Gideon's ship as a bodyguard for the Farseer. Tall, too tall, inhumanly slender, silent, keeping themselves to the part of the ship assigned them. Aspect warriors, Gideon had called them, whatever that meant. The plumed crests on their great, curved helmets had made them seem even taller once they were in armor. They deployed to the surface with Ravener, the Seer Lord, and 3 more of Ravener's band. A third strike team of 6 under Ravener's senior lieutenant, Rav Skinner, was advanced about a kilometre to our west. Ghoul, or 5213X, to give it its Carto Imperialis code, was nothing like I had imagined it. It didn't at all resemble the arid world I had glimpsed in Marla Tare's mind, the dried-out husk where primeval cities lay buried under layers of ash. I suppose that was because all I'd seen was her own imagined view of the place. She'd never seen it. She hadn't lived long enough to get the chance. I wondered if Ghoul matched the Farseer's vision. Probably. The Eldar seemed unnecessarily precise bastards to me. We'd approached the world in a wide, stealthy orbit. The Hinterlight was equipped with disguise fields that Ravener was reluctant to explain to me, but which I felt were partly created by his own terrifyingly strong will. High-band sensors had located a starship in tight orbit, a rogue trader of some considerable size that didn't appear to realize we were there. Ghoul itself was invisible, or nearly invisible. I have never seen a world that seemed so much to be not there. It was a shadow against the starfield, a faintly discernible echo of matter. Even on the sunward side, it lacked any real form. It appeared to soak up light and give nothing back. When Sanya Priest, Ravena's shipmistress, had brought us the first surface scans to study, we thought she was showing us close-up pictures of a child's toy. "It's a maze," I remember saying. "A puzzle, like an interlock," Ravena decided. "No, a carved fruit pit," Medea had said. We had all looked at her. "The works of the Lord? On the heart of a stone?" she asked. "Anybody?" "Perhaps you'd explain," I'd said. So she had, at some length, until we grasped the idea. The hermits of Glavia, so it seems, thought no greater expression of their divine love for the Emperor could be made than to inscribe the entire imperial prayer onto the pits of Sekeres. A Sekeri, we learned, was a soft, sweet summer fruit that tasted of quince and nougat. A bit like a shern apple, we were reliably informed. The pits were the size of pearls. Thankfully, no one had made the mistake of asking what a shern apple was. "I don't know how they do it," Medea had gone on. "They do it by eye with a needle. They can't even see, I don't think. But they used to show us lists of the carved pits, magnified in scholam. You could read every word, every last word, the works of the Lord on the heart of a stone, all laced together tight and compact, using every corner of the space. We were taught that the prayer pits were one of the 19 wonders of Glavia, and that we should be proud." 19 wonders? Sanya had asked. "Golden Throne, woman, don't get us started," I had cried out. But there had indeed been something in Medea's comparison. The surface of Ghoul had been engraved. That's what it looked like. A perfect black sphere, engraved across its entire surface with tight, deep interlocking lines. In reality, each of those lines was a smooth-sided gorge, 200 meters wide and 900 meters deep. I wondered about Medea's description. I remembered the chart we had witnessed during the auto-seance on Promedy, and the way dear Amos's notes had taken on the same scrolling forms of the chart as he struggled to decipher it. Ghoul could very well be engraved, I decided. The Warped One's entire culture, certainly their language, had been built upon expressions of location and place. I imagined that the inscribed wall we had seen during the auto-seance had been part of just such a maze of lines, from a time when Promedy had looked like Ghoul, the capital world. Sanya Priest's sensors had located heat and motion traces on the surface. We'd assembled the teams and prepared for planetfall. The Hinterlight's shipmistress had been told to line up on the enemy's ship and stand ready to take it out. Our 3 vessels, my pinnace and 2 shuttles from Ravena's stable, had sunk low into the thin atmosphere and skimmed across the perfect geometric surface, their shadows flitting across the flat black sections and the deep chasms. We'd put down in adjacent gorges near the target zone. The first surprise had been that the air was breathable. We'd all brought vacuum suits and rebreathers. "How is that possible?" Elena had asked. "I don't know." "But it's so unlikely. I mean, it's unfeasible," she had stammered. "Yes, it is." The second surprise had been the discovery that Medea was right. Kenza had knelt down with his auspex at the side of the gorge, studying microscopically the relationship between chasm floor and chasm wall. I didn't need him to tell me they were perfect. Smooth, exact, machined, engraved. "The angle between floor and wall is 90 degrees to a margin of accuracy that, well, it is so precise it goes off my auspex's scale. Who could do a thing like this?" Kenza had gasped. "The hermits of Glavia?" Medea had cracked. "If they had fusion beams, starships, a spare planet, and unlimited power supplies," I had said. "Besides, tell me this. Who polished the planet smooth before they started?" We moved down the gorge. It curved gently to the west, like an old river, deep cut in its banks. Long before, on KCX 1288, facing the Ceruthi, I had been disconcerted by the lack of angular geometry. Now I was disturbed by the reverse. Everything was so damned precise, squared off, unmarked and unblemished. Only a faint sooty deposit in the wide floor of the trench suggested any antiquity at all. We caught up with Nail. "They know we're here," he said, referring to the sounds of battle in the nearby gorge. "Any idea of numbers?" I asked. "Not a thing, but Skinner's mob has found trouble too. Vesserines, so he reckons, wrapped up in carapace suits and loaded for bear." "We'd best be careful, then." I tried Ravener, using my mind instead of my intervox. "Status. The Aspects have—" Whoa, quieter, Gideon. "Sorry, I forget sometimes you—" "I what?" "You're hurt, I meant to say. The Aspect warriors have engaged. It's quite busy here." I could feel the subsurface twinges of power as he channeled his mind into the force chair's psi cannons. "Opposition," I sent. "Vesserine Janissaries and some other heterodox mercs. We—" He broke off. There was a grinding wash of distortion for a moment. "Sorry," he sent. "Some sort of fusion weapon. They certainly don't want us in here." "In where?" He broadcast a sequence of map coordinates, and I took the map slate out of Nail's hands and punched them in. "A structure," Ravener sent. "Ahead of us, southwest of you. It's built into the end pier of one of the gorge junctions. Although I can't see how. There are no doors. The Vesserine are coming out of somewhere, though. There must be a hidden entrance." More distortion. Then he floated back to me. "The Vesserine are fighting like maniacs. My Lord Seer says they have already earned the respect of the Aspects." "Your Lord Seer?" "Send again. I didn't make that out." "Nothing, Gideon. We're going to try and come round on your flank, around the northeast intersection of the gorge." "Understood." "Come on," I urged. The others all jumped, all except Alina, and I realized I was still using my psyche. Sloppy. I was tired and in pain. Still no excuse. "My apologies," I said, vocal again. "We're moving forward. This chasm turns southwest and intersects with two others. Target sites at the junction, so Gideon reckons." We hurried forward, moving through the steep shadow of the gorge. "Glory be!" exclaimed Kenza suddenly. He was looking up. Bright flashes lit up the starry sky framed by the sides of the chasm. They washed back and forth like spills of milk in ink. Alerted to our presence, Glor's starship had presented for combat, and the hinterlight was answering. Vast blinks of light lit up the sky like a strobe. "I wouldn't want to be up there," said Call Crane. Crane was a hiver who'd never served in any formal militia. His allegiance was to Ravener first, and to the underclan of Tan Hive 9, Tan Sect, second and last. He was a short, pale man, wearing patched and cut-off flak canvas. His skin was dyed with clan colours, and his eyes were cheap augments. He wore a string of human teeth around his neck, which was ironic, as his own teeth were all made of ceramite. Crane raised his night-sighted Transvasser auto-rifle to his shoulder and scurried forward. He'd lived in a lightless warren of city all his life, until Ravener recruited him. This gloom suited him. The sound of catapults grew louder. There were several of them at work now, buzzing out a duet with heavyweight lasguns. I heard the gritty thump of a grenade. Kenza, the archaeologist, was lagging. He wasn't part of Ravener's official troop, merely an expert paid to help out on Promedy. I didn't like him much. He had no fibre and no real commitment. I didn't need to read his mind to see that he was only here for the potential fortune a few exclusive academic papers about the ghoul discovery could make him. "Hurry up," I yelled at him. My back was getting tired and the blood in my mouth was back again. Kenza was hunched down at the base of the chasm's side, fidgeting with his hand scanner. I called a halt and stomped back to him, my heavy boots reinforced with the brace's metal frame, kicking up soot. Iron hoof indeed. I believe my greatest annoyance wasn't the brace frame or its weight or the lumpen gait I was forced to adopt, not even the non-specific hemorrhage that was seeping into my mouth. No, the worst thing was my cold scalp. I really couldn't get used to it. Crezia had been obliged to shave my head in order to implant the cluster of neural and synaptic cables that would drive the augmetic frame around my legs. She had been upset all through the implant procedure. It really was terribly crude, even by basic Imperial standards. But out in the middle of nowhere at all, it had been the best she and Antribus could cobble together. Needs must, as they say. I was bald, and the back of my skull was raw, sore, and clotted, with the multiple implant jacks of the sub-spine feeds my faithful Medicaes had installed to make my leg frame work. The steel-jacketed cables sprouted from my scalp and ran down my back into the lumbar servo of the walking brace. The bunched cables were flesh-stapled to my back, like a neat augmetic ponytail. I would get used to it in time. If there was time. If there wasn't, what the hell did it matter? I stopped beside Kenza, throwing a hard shadow over him. "What are you doing?"
"Making a recording, sir," he gabbled. "There's a marking here. The carved walls we've seen so far have been blank."
I peered down. It was difficult to bend. "Where?" He pulled a puffer brush out of his kit pack and blew the soot away.
"There."
A small spiral, cut into the smooth face of the rock. It looked like a tiny version of the chart we'd seen on Promedy, or a really tiny version of the mazed surface of this planet. "Record it quickly and move on," I told him. I turned away. "Let's go," I called over my shoulder curtly. Kenza screamed. There was a flurry of lasfire. I wheeled back immediately. Kenza was sprawled on the floor of the gorge, ripped apart by laser shots. He was only partially articulated. Such had been the point-blank ferocity of the shots. The wide puddle of blood seeping from his carcass was soaking into the soot. There was no sign of any attacker. "What the hell?" Barbarisata was in my hand and had been purring, but now it was dull. Nail dropped close to me, his matte black hellgun sweeping the area of the corpse.
How in the name of terror did that happen?
He asked.
Leaf, call. Upside.
I looked back. Gustine and Crane were walking backwards slowly, scoping up at the cliff tops of the gorge.
Nothing. No shooters above,
Gustine reported. I slapped my palm against the cold stone face of the gorge above the marking Kenza had found. It was unyielding. We moved forward, following the sweep of the chasm. Crane was covering our backs. After we'd gone about 50 meters, he suddenly cried out. I turned in time to see him in a face-to-face gunfight with two Vesserine Janissaries in full carapace wear. Crane staggered backwards as he was hit repeatedly in the torso, but managed to keep firing. He put a burst of rounds through the faceplate of one of the Vesserines before the other one made the kill shot and dropped him into the soot. Nail and Medea were already firing. The remaining Vesserine swung his aim and squeezed off another salvo, winging both Alina and Nail. Then he walloped over onto his back as Kara's cannon ripped him apart. "See to them!" I ordered, pointing Medea at Nail and Alina. Nail had been skinned across the left arm, and Alina had a flesh wound on her left shin. Both kept insisting they were fine. Medea opened her kit bag for field dressings. I looked at the corpses, Crane and the Vesserines. Gustine appeared beside me.
"Where the Jesh did they come from?"
he asked. I didn't answer. I drew my rune staff over my head out of its leather boot and gripped it tightly as I focused my force at the gorge wall. Soot and the debris of eons puffed out, and I saw another spiral mark in the wall like the one Kenza had found. "Charts," I said.
"What, sir?"
asked Leaf. I bent down, spitting on my fingers, then rubbing my hand across the spiral marks. I tried to ignore the fact that there was a smear of blood in the spittle. No wonder Ravener couldn't find a door. We're not seeing this in the right dimension.
"Pardon me, but what the crap hole are you talking about?"
asked Leaf. I liked him, always honest. The warped ones understood location and moment in ways we can't imagine. They were, after all, warped. We see this as a geometric network of mathematically precise chasms, a maze. But it's not. It's four-dimensional. "4," Gustine began, uncertainly. "Oh, 4, 6, 8, who knows? Think of it this way, like a woven garment."
"A woven garment, sir?"
"Yes, all those thick intertwined threads, such a complex pattern."
"All right."
Now imagine the knitting needles that made it. Just the needles. Big and hard and simple. "Okay," said Medea, joining us. "This planet is simply the knitting needles. Hard, rigid, simple. The reality of Ghoul is the garment woven from it, something we can't see, something complex and soft, interlaced round the needles."
"I'm sorry, sir. You've lost me,"
Leaf Gustine said. "Lost," I said. "That's damn right. These marks on the wall, they're like mini-charts, explaining how the overall reality can be accessed and exited." Gustine nodded as if he understood.
"Right. So, going back, where the Jesh did the Janissaries come from?"
he asked. I slapped the hard wall. "There. Right there."
"But it's solid rock."
"Only to us," I said. As we moved on again down the gorge, we formed a pack that covered all sides, like a phalanx of spearmen from the old ages of warfare. The sounds of Ravenor's battle had become frenetic. Nail reported grimly that he couldn't raise Skinner or any of his force any more. We all hunted the walls for further carvings. "Here, sir, here!" Kara sang out. I ran over to the spiral cut she had found. "Wait," I ordered. Like an eye blinking, the smooth rock opened. Suddenly it just wasn't there. A Vesserine Janissary in combat carapace pushed out, weapon raised. Nail had him cold, felling him with a single shot. But there were more behind the first. Medea started shooting. 2 more mercs had blinked out of the gorge wall on the far side of us. There was no cover, no damn cover at all. In a moment, we were fired on from a third angle. I had already drawn the big Hecutor auto-pistol I had borrowed from the Hinterlight's arsenal. Gustine's old Laz was cracking away beside me, and Alina was emptying her pistol's extended clip on semi-automatic. They'd just been poaching us up until now. This was a full-scale ambush. I counted at least 15 Janissaries, as well as an Oghren with a heavy weapon. Nail went down, hit in the thigh, but he kept blasting. A las round sparked bluntly against the heavy brace on my left leg. Time to reset the odds. "Cherubael!" I commanded. It had been drifting high above the gorge, trailing us like a kite, but now it descended, gathering speed, beginning to shine. I had been much more careful in my design of this demon host. Elaborating on the basic and hasty ritual construction Amos and I had wrought in those last few minutes aboard the SN, I had supplemented the wards and rune markings on its flesh to reinforce its obedience. This demon host would not be permitted to have any of the capricious guile of the previous versions. It would not rebel. It would not be a maverick that had to be watched at all times. It was bound and locked with triple wards, totally subservient. I like to think I could learn from my mistakes, at least sometimes. Of course, there was a price to pay for such security. This Cherubael could manifest much less power, a direct consequence of its reinforced bindings. But it had enough. More than enough. It swept down the gorge, warp flame trailing from its upright body, and demolished one group of attackers in a blurry storm of ether. To their credit, the Vesserines didn't scream, but they broke and started to fall back. The Oghren fired his heavy weapon at the incoming host. The impact fluttered off Cherubael like petals. It punched its talons into the squealing abhuman's chest and lifted the big brute off the ground. And then threw him. The Oghren went up, just simply went up, and kept going. Cherubael changed direction and skimmed across the gorge towards the retreating mercs. Our guns had whittled their numbers down by then, and we were in pursuit, though Alina had stayed with the sprawled, cursing Nail. I noticed something else about this new Cherubael. It didn't laugh anymore. Ever. Its face was set in an implacable frown. It showed no signs of taking any pleasure in its slaughter. I was pleased about that. The laughter really did used to get on my nerves. It was going to take a while to get used to Cherubael's new face, though. Once installed within the flesh host, the demon had made its usual alterations, the sprouting nub horns, the talons, the smooth, glossy skin, the blank eyes. But it had not entirely erased the features of Godwyn Fishig. It killed the last of the ambushers, all save one who reached the gorge wall and accessed the dimension trap they had emerged from. "Hold it!" I ordered. "Hold it open!" Cherubael obeyed. It atomized the last merc as the trap blinked open, and then braced its arms wide, preventing the trap from closing. Even for Cherubael, this was an effort.
"Hurry up,"
it said, as if annoyed with me. I reached the trap. There wasn't time to get us all through. Gustine hurled himself in, headlong, and I followed, shouting to the others to stay back and stay together. The last thing I heard was a loud, liquid impact that must have been the Oghren finally obeying the laws of gravity. The trap blinked shut. I felt a sickening twist of translation. I landed on top of the sprawled Gustine in a dim, boxy space that smelled musty. "Ow!" he complained. I got to my feet. That in itself was ridiculously hard. I was sweating freely by the time I was vertical. "You okay?" Gustine asked. "Yes," I snapped. I wasn't really. My head was throbbing, and the pain in my legs was beginning to overcome the power of the drugs that were self-administering from a dispenser Crezia had fitted to my hip.
"You had better not expect me to carry you,"
Cherubale whispered behind me. "Don't worry, your dignity isn't in danger." I drew Barbariseta, holding it in my right hand, and gripped my rune staff in my left. I stomped forward. Darkness. A wall. I turned. Another wall. "Gustine!" He'd switched on a lamp pack, but it was showing him nothing but black walls. There was no sign of a ceiling. "How far can you see?" I asked Cherubale.
"Forever,"
it said, floating alongside me. "Fine. In practical terms, how far can you see?"
"Not far in here. I can see that the wall ends there. There is a gap beyond it."
"Very well." I plodded ahead. My back really hurt now, where the implants went in, and my nose was bleeding. Gustine clipped the lamp pack to the bayonet lug of his las. He tried to reach Nail on the Vox, dead and silent. I made an effort to reach Ravener with my mind. Nothing. Heavy-footed, I moved through the darkness with my odd companions. The rune staff was trembling, sniffing some focus of power. "You feel that?" I asked the demon. It nodded. I decided we would follow it. "Have you noticed we can breathe in here, too?" Gustine remarked a few minutes later. "Gosh, I wouldn't have picked up on that." He frowned at me, put upon. "I mean, the air's right, inside and out."
"It's so the enemy can breathe,"
Cherubale said. "What's that supposed to mean?"
"They got here first. They got inside. Ghoul made the atmosphere appropriate for them as soon as Ghoul sensed they were there."
"You're talking like Ghoul is alive."
"Ghoul has never been alive,"
it said.
"It's never been dead, either,"
it added a moment later. I was about to ask it to expand a little on that alarming notion, but Cherubale suddenly surged forward in the blackness ahead of us. I saw a flash of light, a laser discharge. It came back, blood steaming off its talons.
"They're hunting for us,"
it said. I have seen wonders in my life. Horrors, too. I have witnessed vistas and spectacles that have cowed my mind and dwarfed my imagination. None of them compared to the mausoleum under Ghoul. I cannot say anything about its size except to use inadequate words like vast, huge. There was nothing to give any scale. We came out of the black tunnels into a black abyss that was, to all intents, much the same, except that the blackness that had been walls was now immaterial. Tiny, scattered specks of light, dozens of them, illuminated small parts of the face of some impossible structure, as dark and cyclopean as the eternal wall ancient philosophers used to believe surrounded creation. The edge of the universe. The side of the casket an ancient god had wrought to keep reality in. Which god, I wouldn't like to say. It was warm and still. Not even the air moved. The dots of light showed small parts of a vast design etched onto the face of the mausoleum. Hints of spirals, lines, and swirling runes. This was where the warped ones had laid their dead king to rest. This was the tomb of Isariel, over which Ghoul had been raised in the strange eons before man. The sight even stunned Cherubale to silence. I hoped its lack of comment was down to awe. I had a nasty feeling it was more to do with reverence, or dread. Gustine lost it for a while. His mind refused to deal with what his eyes were seeing. He began to weep inconsolably and fell to his knees. It was a dismal sight to see such a robust, fearless man reduced in such a way. I let him be as long as I dared, but the sounds of his weeping carried in the dark and seemed alarmingly loud. Some of the tiny lights on the face of the mausoleum began to move, as if descending. I took hold of the sobbing fighter and tried to use my will to calm him. It didn't work. No persuasion could anchor the edges of his sanity where it had come adrift. I had to be harsher. I numbed his mind with a deep psychic probe, blocking his terror out and freezing his thoughts, but for the most basic instincts and biological functions. We approached the mausoleum across a plain of lightless stone. The further we got, the further away I realized the structure actually was. It was evidently even bigger than I had first realized. I had Gustine switch off his lamp pack. We simply followed the dots of light up ahead. I suggested that Cherubale might like to warn us if the darkness around us became anything other than a flat table of stone. A chasm, for example. The only advantage in the mindless scale of the place, as I could see it, was that the enemy would have a hard job finding us. There was so much space to search. After what seemed like an hour, we were still a very long way from the tomb. I checked my chronometer to determine precisely how long it had been since we accessed the interior of Ghoul, but it had stopped. Stopped isn't right, exactly. It was still running and beating seconds, but the time was not recording in any way. I recalled the clock in Amos's suite, chiming to mark out times that had no meaning. As we closed on our destination, I was able to make more sense of the lights. Tiny dots they had seemed, casting little fields of light. They were massive lamps, high power, of the sort used to light landing fields or military camps. Mounted on suspensor platforms, they floated at various points in front of the face of the mausoleum, lighting up surface details in patches of glare the size of amphitheatres. There were 43 of the platforms, each with its own lamp. I counted them. There were men on the platforms, human figures. Glor's men, I was sure, some of them mercenary guards, most of them adepts of arcane law enlisted to his cause. As we watched, some of the platforms drifted slowly or adjusted the sweep of their light. They were reading the wall. By whatever catalogue of means, Glor had learned of this place, found it, and made his way inside to plunder its vile treasures. But its innermost secrets clearly still eluded him. That was why he had wanted the Malus Codicium so badly. To turn the final lock, to get him through the final barrier. One of the platforms began to climb vertically, its lamplight flickering across the passing relief of the tomb face. It climbed and then halted far up above at what seemed to be the top of the wall. Its beam picked out an open square, an entrance perhaps, though who would put an entrance at the top of a wall without steps? I scolded myself for asking. The warped ones.
Glor is up there,
Cherubale said. It was right. I could smell the monster's mind. We hurried the last distance to the foot of the mausoleum wall. Several cargo flyers and 2 bulk speeders were parked down here, alongside metal crates of equipment and spares for the lamp platforms. Their base camp. We waited. I considered our options. Almost at the same time, 2 of the platforms descended the wall to ground level, dimming their huge lamps. There were about 6 men on each one. One settled in, and 2 men jumped down, hurrying towards one of the cargo flyers. I could hear them, exchanging words with the crew on the platform. A moment later, the other came down, softly beside it. I could see the men. They were dressed in light fatigues or environment robes. Some carried data slates. The men who had gone to the flyer returned, carrying an equipment crate between them. They loaded it onto the platform, and it immediately began to climb back up the wall, its lamp powering back to full beam to resume its work. "Come on," I said quietly. More men were loading more crates onto the other platform. There were 6 in all, 4 in robes and 2 armoured mercs operating the platform controls. Barbarisata took the 3 loaders out with 2 quick strokes. Gustine dragged a man backwards over the platform rail and snapped his neck. Cherubale embraced the 2 mercs from behind, and they turned to ash and sifted away. We got on board. "Get ready with the lamp," I told Gustine. I studied the platform control panel quickly, and then activated the lift. The attitude controls were a simple brass lever. We rose. The tomb face whispered by. As we lifted past the lowermost of the working platforms, Gustine powered up the lamp and angled it towards the wall. I couldn't remember quite how far up the platform had been before it had descended for spares, how long before we passed our designated spot and were noticed by the others. I hoped they were all too engrossed in their work. We were about 2/3 of the way up when we heard shots from another platform, and a lamp swung our way. Almost immediately, so did several others, tracking our ascent. Lasfire pinged across at us. Gustine dropped down by the rail and returned fire. I kept us rising.
"Do you want me to?"
Cherubale asked. "No, stay put." Gustine's next salvo took out the lamp of a platform rising after us. A huge shower of sparks erupted out and drizzled down the tomb face. I felt multiple jolts as shots impacted against the underside of our rig. Almost there. We rose up next to the entrance. It was square, maybe 40 meters across. A platform was already floating outside it, and, clumsy with the controls, I slammed us against it. The men aboard began firing. There were others inside the dim mouth of the entrance. Gustine blasted back. I saw one topple back onto the deck of the other platform, and then another pitch clean off and drop like a stone. Las fire and solid rounds raked our vehicle, tearing strips and nuggets out of the deck plating and the rail. Shot through, the lamp died. I hauled on the control stick and slammed us sideways into the other platform, deliberately this time. We ground against them and drove them into the tomb face. The edge of their hull shrieked out sparks as it tore against the stone. I did it again. They were screaming and firing. "Let's move!" Gustine yelled. He heaved a grenade into the mouth of the entrance to clear us a path. There was a dull bang and a flash, and two figures came flailing out into the air. Gustine tossed a second onto the other platform, and then leapt over the rail into the tomb entrance, blasting into the wafting smoke haze with his las rifle. I followed him, Cherubale drifting at my heels. It was damn hard to step wide enough and span the gap between the platform and the entrance's stone lip. Gustine's second grenade ripped a hole through the deck of the other platform. It sagged and then dropped, like a descending elevator, trailing flames. Far below us, it tore through two other platforms and spilled men and debris into the air. The jolt of the blast had come at the wrong moment for me. Our platform shuddered and yawed out like a boat at a dock, and I was still halfway across, forcing my stiff, heavy limbs to carry me. I was going to fall. The brace around my body felt as heavy as an anchor, pulling me down. Cherubale grabbed me under the arms and hoisted me neatly into the entrance. I was grateful, but I couldn't find it in me to thank it. Thank Cherubale. The idea was toxic. Then again, just as unlikely was the notion of Cherubale voluntarily saving my life. Gustine was fighting his way forward down the entrance, which we saw now was a long tunnel that matched the dimensions of the opening. Crates of equipment were piled up in the mouth, and floating glow globes had been set at intervals along the wall. They looked like they went on for a long way. 4 or 5 mercs and servants of our adversary were dead on the tunnel floor, and half a dozen more were backed down the throat of it, firing to drive us out. Cherubale swept forward and obliterated them. We came after him. I so dearly wished I could run. The tunnel opened on the other side of the tomb face. We set eyes on the interior. By now I had become numb to the inhuman scale of things. The tomb was a vault in which one might comfortably store a continent. The inner walls and the high stone-beamed roof were lavishly decorated with swirls of script and emblems that I swore I would never allow to be seen by other eyes. This was the crypt where Isariel lay in death, and the walls screamed his praise and worship. I could make out little of the dark gulf below, but there was something there, something the size of a great imperial hive city. I discerned a black geometric shape that was fashioned from neither stone nor metal, nor even bone, but, it seemed, all of those things at once. It was repellent, dead but alive, dormant but filled with the slumbering power of 1,000,000 stars. The bark of the Demon King, Isariel's chariot of unholy battle, his instrument of apocalypse, with which he had scoured the warped fortresses and habitations of his own reality in wars too dreadful to imagine. Glaw's prize. From the globe-lit tunnel we could make our way out onto a massive plinth of dark onyx that extended from the edge of the inner wall. There was a block raised there, a polished tooth of dark green mineral, 40 meters tall, set deep into the plinth. It was wound with carved spirals. Glow globes floated around it, and tools and instruments lay at its foot. Pontius Glaw had been studying this discovery himself, but the noise of our violent entry had alerted him. He was waiting for us. He emerged from behind the standing block, calm, almost indifferent. His tall, gleaming machine body was as I had remembered it from the auto-seance. The cloak of blades clinked as he moved. The ever-smirking golden mask smirked.
"Gregor Eisenhorn,"
he said softly.
"The galaxy's most persistent bastard. Only you could scrabble and slash and claw and crawl your way to me. Which, of course, is why I admire you so."
I stomped forward.
"Careful,"
Gustine hissed. But I had long passed the point where being careful was a high priority. I faced Glor. He was broader than me and a good deal taller. His blade cloak jangled as he stroked a perfectly articulated duralloy hand across the surface of the green block. Then he raised the same hand and held it up for inspection.
Magos Bjor did a fine job, didn't he? Such a craftsman. I can never thank you enough for arranging his services. This is the hand I killed him with.
There's more than his blood on your hands, Glor. Do you answer to that name now, or do you prefer to hide behind the title Kanyar?
Either will do.
Your daughter didn't take either of your names. He was silent. If I could get him angry, I could perhaps force an error.
Marla,
he said.
So headstrong. Another reason to kill you, apart from the obvious.
He was about to say something else, but I had waited long enough. I blasted my will through the rune staff and lunged forward, swinging my blade. The psychic blast knocked him back, and he half-turned, his cloak whirling out and turning Barbarissator aside with its multiple edges. His turn became a full spin, and I lurched back to avoid the lethal hem of his blade cloak. Gustine moved in, firing bolts of light that simply reflected off Glor's gleaming form. Cherubael came in from the other side. Its searing attack scorched Glor's metal, and I heard him curse. He slashed at Cherubael with his open hand, extending hook blades from slots in the fingertips. The hooks ripped into Cherubael's flesh, but it made no cry. It grappled with Pontius Glor, psychic power boiling the space between them, and flaring out in spasming tendrils of light. The very air crisped and ionized. Glor's dancing metal feet chipped flakes of onyx off the plinth beneath him. I tried to get in, to land a blow in support of the demon host, but it was like approaching a furnace. Gustine simply looked on, open-mouthed. He was so far out of his league it wasn't funny. Glor tore out a savage blow that spun Cherubael away for a second, and followed it up with a lance of mental fury that actually made the demon host tumble out of the air. Cherubael got up slowly, like a thrown rider, and rose up off the ground again. In that short break, I rejoined the struggle, driving at Glor with alternate blows of staff and sword, keeping the most powerful mind wall I could erect between us. Glor smashed the wall into invisible pieces, struck me hard, and tore the staff out of my hand. His blades lacerated my arm and ripped my cloak. I exerted all the force I had and rallied with Barbarissator, cutting in with rotating ulsars and heavy sai-hets that chimed against his rippling cloak armor. The rune staff had fallen out of reach. I ducked to avoid a high sweep of his razor hem, but I had forced myself too hard. I felt cranial plugs pop and servos tear out of my back. Pain knifed up my spine. I barely got clear of his next strike. My sword work became a frantic series of Tan-Fei-Sa parries as I tried to back away and fend off his hooks and cloak blades. Cherubael charged back at Glor, but something intercepted it in mid-air. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Cherubael locked in aerial combat with an incandescent figure. They tumbled away off the plinth, out over the gulf of the tomb.
You don't think you're the only one to have a pet, do you?
Glor jeered.
And my demon host is not restricted in its power like yours. Poor Cherubael, you've treated him so badly.
It's an it, not a him, I snarled, and placed a high stroke that actually notched his golden mask.
Bastard!
He squealed, and swept his cloak around under my guard. The thick metal of my body brace deflected the worst of it, but I felt blood welling from cuts to my ribs. I staggered back. The agony in my spine was the worst thing, and I was certain my already limited motion was now badly impaired. My left leg felt dead and heavy. Iron hoof. Iron hoof. He thrust at me with his talons and nearly shredded my face. I blocked his hand at the last second, setting Barbarissator between his splayed fingers and locking out his strike. He threw me back. I was off step, outbalanced by my slow, heavy mechanical legs. Laser shots danced across Glor's face and chest as Gustine tried vainly to help out. Glor pirouetted, a move that seemed impossibly nimble for such a giant, and his cloak whirred out almost horizontally with the centrifugal force. Hundreds of fast-moving razor-sharp blades whistled through Gustine, so fast, so completely, that he didn't realize what had happened to him. A mist of blood puffed in the air. Gustine collapsed. Literally. Glor turned on me again. I'd lost sight of Cherubael. I was on my own. And only now did I admit to myself that I was outmatched. Glor was almost impervious to damage. Fast, armored, deadly. Even on a good day he would have been hard to defeat in single combat. And this wasn't a good day. He was going to kill me. He knew it too. As he pressed his assault, he started to laugh. That cut me deeper than any of his blades. I thought of Fishig, Amos, and Bequin. I thought of all the allies and friends who had perished because of him. I thought of what his spite had done to me, and what it had cost me to get this far. I thought of Cherubael. The laughter reminded me of Cherubael. I came back at him so hard and so furiously that Barbarisator's blade became notched and chipped. I struck blows that snapped blade scales off his clinking cape. I struck at him until he wasn't laughing any more. His answer was a psychic blast that smashed me backwards 10 paces. Blood spurted from my nose and filled my mouth. I didn't fall. I would not give him that pleasure. But Barbarisator flew, screaming from my dislodged grip. I was hunched over, my hands on my thighs, panting like a dog. My head was swimming. I could hear him crunching over the onyx towards me. "You'd have won by now, if you'd had the book," I said, coughing the blood from my mouth.
What?
"The book. The damned book. The Malus Codicium. That's what you were really after when you sent your hired murderers against me. That's why you tore my operation apart and killed everyone you could reach. You wanted the book."
Of course I did,
he snarled. I looked up at him. "It would have unlocked the prize already, done away with this endless, fruitless study. You'd simply have opened the tomb and taken the demon's chariot, long before we could ever get here."
"Savor that little triumph, Gregor," he said. "Your little Pyrrhic victory. By keeping that book from me, you have added extra months, years to my work. Isariel's weapon will be mine, but you've made its acquisition so much harder."
"Good," I said. He chuckled.
"You're a brave man, Gregor Eisenhorn. Come on now. I'll make it quick."
His blades clinked. "I suppose, then," I added, "I'd have been mad to bring it with me." He froze. With a shaking, bloody hand, I reached into my coat and took out the Malus Codicium. I think he gasped. I held it out, half open, so he could see, and riffled the pages through with my fingers.
"You foolish, foolish man,"
he said, smiling. "That's what I thought," I said. With one brutal jerk, I ripped the pages out of the cover.
"No!"
he cried. I wasn't listening. I fixed my mind on the loose bundle of sheets in my hands and subjected them to the most ferocious mental blast I could manage. The pages caught fire. I threw them up into the air. Glor screamed with despair and rage. A blizzard of burning pages fluttered around us. He tried to grab at them. He moved like an idiot, like a child, snatching what he could out of the air, trying to preserve anything at all. The pages burned, leaves of darkness billowing across the plinth, consumed by fire. He snatched a handful, tried for more, stamping out those half-burned sheets that landed on the ground. He wasn't paying any attention to me at all. Barbarisator tore into him so hard it almost severed his head. Electricity crackled from the rent metal. He rasped and staggered. The Carthaean blade sang in my hands as I ripped it across his chest and shattered part of his cloak. He fell backwards, right at the edge of the plinth, his finger-hooks shrieking as they fought to get a purchase on the smooth onyx. I swung again, an upswing that ripped off his golden mask and sent it spinning out over the gulf. The interior of his head was revealed. The circuits, the crackling, fusing cables, the crystal that contained his consciousness and being, set in its cradle of links and wires. "In the name of the holy God-emperor of Terra," I said quietly, "I call thee Diabolus, and here deliver thy sentence." My own blood was dripping off Barbarisator's hilt between my double-handed grip. I raised the blade. "Amade the Ul Care." The blade split his head and shattered the crystal into flecks of glass. Pontius Glor's metal body convulsed, jerked back and fell off the edge of the plinth. down into the gulf, into the blackness of the Demon King's tomb, its cloak blades chiming. I was sitting on the plinth, with my back against the tomb wall, blood slowly pooling around me, when a light flashed out in the darkness of the vault. It came closer. At last, Cherubbaal floated down and hovered over me. Its face, limbs, and body were hideously marked with wheals, burns, and gashes. I looked up at it. It was hard to move, hard to concentrate. There was blood in my mouth, in my eyes. Glor's demon host?
Gone.
He claimed it was more powerful than you.
You don't know how nasty I can be,
it said. I thought about that. The last of the diabolic book's pages were mere tufts of black ash, scattered across the plinth.
Are we finished here?
It asked. Yes, I said. It frowned.
I'm going to have to carry you after all, aren't I?
It sighed. Dossier Addendum. Notes concerning the key individuals in this account. Inquisitor Gideon Ravener supervised the annulment of 5213X, also known in some records as Ghoul. Despite long debates amongst the sector ordos, no attempt to recover an artifact and material from 5213X was ever permitted. Under orders from Battlefleet Scarus, under the command of Lord Admiral Olm Madathene, he annihilated the planet in 392.M41. Ravener continued to serve the Inquisition for several centuries, performing many notable acts, including the destruction of the heretic Thonius Slight, but his posthumous fame results more from the quality of his writings, especially the peerless work, The Spheres of Longing. Inquisitor Golesh Heldane survived the destruction of the SN at Jaganda. His bodyguards were forced to sever his leg to free him and carried him to his ship. He spent many years recovering from his horrific injuries, which required still more severe augmetic reconstruction than he had already undergone. He returned to active service, but his career was blighted by his reputation. He was killed, following injury, on Menazoid Epsilon in 765.M41. Harlan Nail continued in the service of the Inquisition for many years, and along with Kara Swole and Alina Coy, joined the staff of Inquisitor Ravener. Their individual fates are not recorded in the Imperial Archive, though it is believed that Nail died circa 450.M41. Crezia Bershilde returned to Gudrun, where she served as Chief Medicae Anatomica at the Universitariate of New Give until her retirement due to failing health in 602.M41. Several of her treatises on augmetic surgery have become standard authority texts. Medea Betancourt returned to Glavia and became the director of her family shipwright business, a post she held for 70 years. She disappeared en route to Sarum in 479.M41, although several later reports suggest she survived that date. Lord Inquisitor Phlebas Alessandro Rawkin recovered from his ill health and became Grand Master of the Ordos Helicon after the disappearance of Leonid Ozma. He held the post for 315 years. Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn is believed to have continued in the service of the Ordos after the events on 5213X, though recorded details of his life and work after that date are conjectural at best. His eventual fate is not recorded in the Imperial Archives. There is no archived mention of the being known as Cherubbaal. That was Eisenhorn, Herticus, by Dan Abnett, read by Toby Longo. This recording is copyrighted to Games Workshop 2017.
Audible hopes you've enjoyed this program.